Back then, I was really confused and unsure about what was happening. It happened almost 10 years ago when I was in my 30s and had recently married my husband. Even before we got married, he was always busy with work, so I thought life with him would be tough. But he was hardly ever home, and I felt really lonely. At first, I tried to let him relax when he did come home, but I started feeling more and more frustrated. I got upset every time I saw him. My husband tried to make me feel better, but if he saw I was still unhappy, he just ignored me. I really wanted him to pay attention to me, even though he was busy with work because we were married. I was so caught up in my feelings that I couldn't see things clearly anymore. Whenever we argued, he would promise things like, "I'll settle down soon, and then we can go to that island you love." But he never did. "I guess work is more important to you than I am," I would say. "If that's the case, you don't have to force yourself to come home. Seeing you so busy just makes me sad." No matter how mean I was to him, he never seemed to take it seriously, and I started to worry that our marriage was falling apart. Soon after, my husband could sense that I wasn't angry with him anymore and didn't seem to care about him. I didn't suspect anything at first because he often went on business trips for work. But one day, I found a receipt and a hotel membership card in his suit pocket when he returned from a trip. The receipt showed that he had stayed at a hotel near our home on a day when he was supposed to be out of town for work, and he had earned points for more than one night. My husband was successful in his job and got along well with women at work. I started to think he might be seeing someone else. Why should I be unhappy while he's enjoying himself with someone else? I thought, so I started going out at night and making plans on weekends, despite knowing about his affair. It was fun at first, but eventually it became exhausting. I was tired of pretending to be happy and not being able to enjoy myself genuinely. Maybe it was time for both of us to move on. We were avoiding each other, not acting like a married couple anymore. It might be better if my husband was happier with someone else. I guess it's time for me to start a new chapter in my life. But it's hard because this is the man I used to love until I realized I didn't want to be with him anymore. It was a tough decision, but I finally gathered the courage to ask for a divorce. I wondered if there was any other option, but it seemed like my husband had already moved on. After thinking for days, I decided to text my husband. "Can you come home early today? We need to talk." I texted him on his phone, and he replied quickly, saying he'd try to come home soon. I couldn't help but think that maybe he didn't want a divorce, even though I was sure about my decision. But it turned out my husband also wanted a divorce. Just the thought of it made my heart race, and I struggled to breathe, feeling like my world was falling apart. It was clear his heart was no longer with me. It belonged to someone else. I told myself not to cry anymore. I decided to end things with a smile, at least. So I made up my mind and waited for him to come home. When he finally arrived around 9 p.m., I noticed he had lost weight unexpectedly. His eyes still looked kind, and his voice was gentle, but there was a huge gap between us that felt impossible to bridge. My husband, who wasn't usually talkative, mostly kept his head down and stayed quiet while I talked. I wanted to end our conversation respectfully, even though I felt like he was making fun of me. We were married, even if it was for a short time, and we were about to get divorced. So why couldn't he tell me how he truly felt? I got angrier and started arguing with him, but he stayed quiet and listened to me. I wanted him to speak up, so I told him I knew about his new girlfriend, even though he probably thought I was clueless. If he knew I was onto him, he'd probably get defensive and make excuses. When I said this, my husband looked surprised at first. Then he chuckled and asked, "Really? You knew?" I couldn't help but laugh at his playful tone, and it made him laugh too. It was the first time in a while that we laughed together, even though the topic was serious. It felt great to share a laugh with my husband again, like we used to. After that, we were able to talk more openly, which felt strange but good. Maybe it was because he realized I knew about the affair. He seemed more alive, and he suggested we stop fighting. "I don't want to leave you because I don't like you," he said. My husband agreed to my suggestion, and we decided to tidy up our room and sort out our things so we could leave whenever we wanted. These were all special memories, but I wanted to keep them hidden for a while. My husband usually held onto things for a long time, but today he didn't hesitate to let them go. "Take whatever you want, it's all my fault, so this is my way of making up for it," he said. As we cleaned up and only had each other's belongings left, I saw tears in my husband's eyes. Did he feel sad as we tidied up? It seemed so, and I felt the same way. "You still have time to think about it, right? Let's take it one step at a time," I suggested. After finishing the cleanup, I took a break for the rest of the day and had a bath to relax. Even though I could ask for compensation from my unfaithful husband, it was clear our relationship was over. Plus, I didn't want to ruin my memories of him any further. As I got ready for bed after my bath, my husband came into the bedroom. He climbed into bed and gently pulled me into his arms. "Hey, this is strange and I feel sorry for your girlfriend," I said. My husband whispered, "Just one more time, I want to be with you." I felt tense. He hugged me, trembling. "Are you crying?" I asked, but he didn't answer. I noticed he felt lighter and thinner as I touched his back. "Are you okay? You seem to have lost weight," I said. His shaking stopped. "I've been trying to lose weight," he said, pulling away. "Okay, is there anything else? Are you sure you're okay?" It had been a while since I'd touched him, and I was surprised by how different he looked. My husband used to be muscular, but now he was slimmer. He said, "She likes me like this." I felt sad again. If he's doing it for her, why doesn't he just forget about me? I thought. I said something sarcastic that I regretted. "You're still the same. I like that about you. I hope you have a happy life from tomorrow. I'll pray for you wherever you are," my husband said, then started snoring. He always did things in his own way. "I hope so too," I whispered to him. I overslept the next day because I stayed up late cleaning the room. When I woke up, my husband was gone from bed. I found an envelope on the table in the living room. Inside were documents related to our shared property and a bank book with a lot of money in my name. There were also divorce papers. My husband's part was already filled out, so all I had to do was sign mine. Panicked, I tried calling him, but his phone was disconnected. I asked his family and friends about him, but nobody knew where he was. I even contacted his company and found out he had quit a few months ago, which surprised me considering how dedicated he was to his work. It's puzzling why my husband went to such lengths instead of simply leaving if he found someone else. And why is everyone keeping quiet? I'm growing suspicious of people, and not being able to contact my husband is taking a toll on my mental health. My husband had arranged compensation for me, and now that I'm free, I decided to spend some time in a place I love. We reached a remote island, which took nearly a day to get to from the mainland. It was sparsely populated, with about 3,000 residents. I had been there once with my husband and fell in love with its natural beauty and slow pace. He had promised we'd return once he finished his work. I miss him, but maybe what I need now is the peace and quiet of this place. I quit my job and moved to the island a few months later, renting out my house. It was a risky decision, but I couldn't stay in that house with so many memories. I'm not sure how my husband paid off the mortgage, but I know he worked hard. I didn't want to disregard all the effort my husband put in, so I felt hesitant to just move on without understanding everything. There were so many oddities, but I couldn't ask my husband anymore. I decided to spend time on a serene island, unwinding and letting myself relax. I gradually adjusted to island life and got to know my neighbors. Although I had enough resources to live comfortably without working, I found that doing nothing made me feel even more down. So I started helping out, assisting the elderly residents with their needs. At first, I was seen as an outsider, but as I got more involved, I was relieved to be accepted as part of the community. While settling into my routine, I found out from a colleague that a new resident had arrived from the mainland for medical treatment. He had fallen ill and chose our island as his final stop because there were no medical facilities available. Moving to an island without medical support is challenging unless you're well prepared. The thought of taking charge was daunting, especially when the new resident requested a visit and I was the only one available. Feeling anxious about his health, I headed to his house. It sat atop a hill with a stunning ocean view. Though renovated, it was basic, barely shielding from the elements. I questioned if this was the best place for him to spend his last days. Nervously, I rang the doorbell. "Come in," a weak voice called out. I entered, finding him by the window. Sunbeams dancing around him. His face was obscured by the backlight, making it hard to see. "Nice to meet you," I began, but as he turned towards me, I froze. It was my husband, or rather, my ex-husband. We were both stunned into silence, just staring at each other. Finally, he spoke, a mischievous smile on his face. "You found me," he said. I was so confused by his presence, given what I'd heard at work, that I could barely form words. My husband took my hand and guided me to sit beside him, holding it until I calmed down. I couldn't find the words to say, and as I sat there was a knock at the door. Wiping my tears, I opened it to find an elderly man standing there. He seemed taken aback by my tear-streaked face, but entered and sat beside my husband. "How are you today?" he asked softly. My husband replied that everything was fine and started chatting with him. The elderly man was likely the island's only doctor. I recalled my colleagues mentioning that there were no hospital facilities on the island, making the clinic nurse and doctor crucial. It seemed my husband had come to spend his final days here. Though it was his choice, I listened closely to their conversation, wondering if there was anything I could do to help. After about 10 minutes, the doctor left. I couldn't resist and followed him out. My flustered appearance seemed to surprise him again, but when I explained our relationship, he seemed to understand. I pressed the doctor for details about my husband's condition and treatment options, but he refused, saying I can't disclose that without his permission. Perhaps out of sympathy, he added, he won't be able to walk on his own soon. It would be a shame for him to be alone in his final days, so please be there for him. I was stunned. Returning to the house with a heavy heart, I found my husband waiting for me. He seemed to have expected my conversation with the doctor and greeted me with a smile. "You're back." Unable to bear being apart from him, I asked to spend the night. My husband's house was bare, with just a few belongings and futons. It was the first time we slept together since discussing divorce. As we lay under the covers, we shared how we ended up here. Although I wanted to ask about his illness, I decided it wasn't the right time for difficult discussions. So we reminisced instead. My emotions about his relationship with her also played a role in my decision. I couldn't help but wonder if he had brought her to the island before I asked to stay. But he just laughed it off and avoided the question. His silence hinted at a somber truth. I didn't want to upset him further by pressing for answers. The next day, I informed my employer about the situation and decided to take some time off. I wanted to cherish whatever time my husband had left. I pushed him around the island in a wheelchair since he couldn't walk far. There were places I remembered from my previous visit, places and sights I wanted him to see. Being together like that felt satisfying for the first time. I wish we had been open with each other during our marriage, even after our divorce. I found that my feelings for him had grown stronger, but it was too late to act on them. Telling him would only confuse him. So I decided to stay by his side like a friend. Though there were some good moments, his illness was gradually wearing him down. His strength dwindled to the point where he couldn't go out or even take short walks. Simple tasks became a challenge, and he started dozing off more frequently. The doctor visited daily, providing some relief from his pain. It was hard to accept that he would leave me so soon. I cared for him tirelessly, never leaving his side so he wouldn't be alone when he woke up, which could happen at any moment. Sometimes he'd wake up and share the dream he just had, or he'd recount old memories as if they were recent. I treasured each moment, even though it deepened my sadness. As time passed, my husband stopped waking up as often. Even when he wasn't talking, I stayed close, reading his favorite books and describing the world around us so he could still feel connected. One day, I wanted to share the beauty of a sunset with him. I held his hand and tried to speak, but his hand felt cold, and his breathing was shallow. His chest rose and fell in an odd rhythm. Panicked, I called the doctor, who promised to come right away. I waited anxiously, feeling like my heart was being torn apart by the uncontrollable situation. I desperately hoped it was all a mistake. I wanted him to reassure me that everything would be all right. But when the doctor arrived, he examined my husband and solemnly said, "His blood pressure has dropped significantly. It's time to let him go peacefully. He wants you by his side, so I'll step back. Don't worry, I'll be close by if needed." With those words, the doctor said his goodbyes to my husband and left the room. The moment I had dreaded had arrived. Though I knew it was inevitable, the pain was unbearable. "I'm grateful to have known you. Despite the challenges, I love you," I whispered to him as I held his hand. To my surprise, he gently squeezed my hand back, though it seemed medically impossible. Shortly after, he took his final breath and passed away quietly. I couldn't stop the tears, but I was relieved to have been there for him at the end. I was so busy with arrangements after his passing that I didn't have time to properly mourn until after the funeral. As I returned home from sorting through my husband's belongings, I noticed a pile of mail that had accumulated like a mountain. Going through them one by one, I was struck by the familiar handwriting on the envelopes. It turned out my husband had written dozens of letters. I couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia as I read through them. His letters began on the day we reunited. He had moved here in the hopes of finding me, but I don't think he expected to actually succeed. He couldn't help but feel surprised and delighted. One of the letters read, "I couldn't help but laugh at how amusing his letters were, and knowing he felt that way was the best compliment he could give me." Each letter was dated, showing he had been sending them every day. However, as his illness progressed, his handwriting became messier and the letters grew shorter. With a heavy heart, I continued reading until one letter caught my eye. In it, he revealed the truth about our divorce. "My illness started during our marriage," he wrote. "When I found out, there was no cure, and the treatment I received only made things worse. I decided to divorce you because I didn't want you to spend the rest of your life taking care of me. I didn't deny the existence of another woman because I thought I could compensate you with money. But since I no longer needed medical treatment, I wanted to liquidate all my assets so you could live freely." As tears streamed down my face from the hurtful words in my husband's letter, there was a knock at the door. Quickly wiping my tears, I opened it to find my doctor standing there. "What brings you here, doctor?" I asked. He handed me a sealed envelope identical to the one I had just read from my husband. He explained that my husband had asked him to deliver it to me. He had written a few days' worth of letters before falling into a coma, entrusting them to me to be posted each day. I couldn't refuse the request, and this was the last letter. The doctor explained that my husband wanted me to receive it when I returned home. So this was my husband's final message. I thanked the doctor and read the letter in solitude. Quietly and calmly opening it, I found a short but clear note that simply said, "Thank you, I love you." Despite all the pain, our hearts remained connected. "I love you too," I whispered, feeling as though I saw a hint of a smile on my husband's portrait. Decades have passed since my husband's passing, yet I still reside on the island, now officially recognized as one of its residents. I built a grave next to where his house once stood on the day I decided I would never leave the island. He used to look out the window every day, and I believe he still does. One day, I'll join him there, surrounded by memories of our life together. Thank you for being with me until the end. Farewell for now.